Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Todoist Office Hours. Super excited today to bring you Francesco, who's one of our official Todoist ambassadors and a new proud father, I think, as well. So has had his hands full with a big full to-do list, and is excited to talk to you a little bit about sections and how to use sections best to maximize your productivity. So I'm going to turn it over to Francesco here in just a second. Please, everybody, just remember you've got the chat on the side, as well as the ability to ask questions along the bottom. So keep the questions coming. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end after Francesco's had some time to go through his portion of the presentation. This should also be streaming on our Twitter and YouTube channels. So you should be able to watch these there and comment there as well. Francesco, let's
watch these there and comment there as well. Francesco, let's watch these there and comment.
All right.
It's there's a second Chase in the room.
Yeah, there's two of us. Okay, technical issues aside now.
Yeah. Oh no. Thanks for having me, Chase. Obviously, it's an exciting time for people to be learning Todoist, especially when they're trying to get a lot of things in order at the moment. And I think if you're like brand new to Todoist, it's a great opportunity right now. And I've been using it throughout, like, for those who don't know, about 7 years or so. So I picked it up just before near enough when I started university. And then what it did is I've used it ever since. And it's been nice because it's one of those tools that has sort of evolved with me over the years. And it's definitely become, each iteration, every 3 months, I tend to do a bit of a clean out and a bit of a refresh on how I use it. And it always seems to get better. So it's a very nifty tool. So Chase mentioned about getting me to show you around sections and how I use it. So I'm going to go and find the share button and we'll get rolling. So what I'll do is I'll give you a bit of a premise around how I use Todoist first, because for some people, they may be looking and going, does he use it for work or does he use it for personal life? Well, I used to probably use it quite a lot for work and personal life, but I've made more of a shift recently to move to just using it for personal life, and that was more towards making sure I was using it most efficiently. But I've used it for both in the past, and it works great for those situations. So my main uses for Todoist are really for managing the new one, which is always fun. And something so new to me that I'm like, it's going to take a bit of time. It's for capturing like recommendations from people, things from purchases to things to watch on Twitter, reads, reading just in general, because I think the Todoist clipper on the mobile iOS device at least is super fast, which means I can just be able to clip useful articles that I may read later. And then errands, literally everything from doing planning the quizzes to the online quizzes, that is, to the calling the local services and all that. That's like British Gas, not the police. So it's a variety use. And I think the one thing I came across when I got started doing it this sort of way is the ability to sort things out using sections. So for those who don't know, sections are just a simple way to break down a certain project on the site. So for example, in this case, I could put admin, and that way I can slice down the project. It's pretty much that simple. The reason I like sections is because it doesn't necessarily commit you to using a subtask, but it doesn't necessarily commit you to using a project. It's sort of this like nice, happy middle ground. I'll just delete this because of reference sake. Also, we'll forget about it. So I have a little bit of not a different process, I guess, to some other people. So what I'll do is obviously I'll have my today items here, all the things I need to do, and they'll be living in a various set of projects. And what I'll do during my day is I'll send stuff into the inbox like normal. And what I tend to do is really just drag it into personal. So this is for me almost just like a quick holding ground, just to get started. And I'll come back to this being could potentially be something that's useful for you later. Then I go over to this personal project, which has 4 projects nested below it. And then what I do is this is almost like a actual inbox here, because I can then sort stuff into the relevant areas. So in this case, I'll say, okay, so payroll is probably an errand. Clear inbox is an errand as well. And watch this YouTube video about boxing is something in the reading list. So I've cleared my main inbox, and obviously it says 0 here, which is just helpful. It makes me know that I've cleared it. And then what I'll do is I'll go down the list, and at the top, this area serves as, because it's not actually associated to a section, it serves as an inbox. So if I have anything up here, I'll drag it into the relevant sections. So in this case, in Otto's section, I have administrative items for him, like even registering his birth, which still hasn't happened because of the blinking virus. You know, things like the routine and things that are associated to his mum. And then down here is recommendations. And recommendations, I have broken down follow-ups. So people that say need refunds that I've had products from that I need to follow up on, things to watch. And that's really handy. You can make these lists from this, the actual sections. You don't have to go ahead and create a brand new project. You could have a one similar to this to capture all the things that people do across the day. And the same here, purchases. So these are things that I'm tempted by purchasing, and I normally put them here so that it's almost like a holding bay before I actually make the purchase. So I can sleep on it instead of making an impulse purchase. I don't know why I would make an impulse purchase on PJ shorts, but you know, is what it is. And down here is a couple of other purchases that I need to make. So obviously the reading area, you could break this down with sections. I have been tempted to have it so that I have a full read section and a non-read section. But if I'm honest, I haven't really played around with the section as much. But I've played around with this section. I've sort of left this a bit muddled just so I can show you how I would go about organizing it. So these are all things that I need to do that I've left over the last 2 days. But what I'll do is I'll simply just begin dragging them into the sections. So this is what's nice about the sections, is you can just slightly organize them. So this obviously needs a due date. So I could move this one down here into finance. So I actually slipped that one in the wrong place. So I can move this all into the different areas, which is really useful. So I have another one down here called home. So the majority of these are recurring tasks because I can have, clean the bathroom on Saturdays, do the bedding on Saturday too. So basically, I can use this opportunity to clear this out, and that's what I'll do each day. So it's the amazing thing about this is that I can keep this clear, and everything else below it goes into the right location. But if you're new to the concept of sections, you can have them without necessarily adding all the due dates to them. So, for example, if you could say, wedding guest list, be useful for anyone getting married, not now, but in a couple of months. So you could start adding, all the people that you were going to invite, and I'll invite Chase as well. And then you can start seeing the tallying list. So they can be as simple as this, but they can also be more advanced in the terms of being able to select dates to them. And I still sometimes will use, so for example, sometimes I'll go into the subtasks and still add like the phone number or any notes that are relevant, either in subtasks or comments. But to be honest, the way that if I open this up, it almost acts as a project in itself, because I can say, right, okay, I am home. I can actually go in here and go, right, what can I do at home? I can get the bathroom done. I can call my grandpa. I can do the bedding, fridge cleanup. You know, everything seems fairly reasonable because it's all in one location. You could potentially do this with the labels area. For example, if you created a label called home and then went ahead and associated, that's just me selecting the two areas and adding the label home to them. Did I accidentally not do that? So I'll do stuff like this. Yeah, it did add it, Doyle. And you can see there, you could do it through that sort of methodology. And then if you opened up home, you'd be able to get the task done. But I think something like this is quite nice, especially when you're trying to keep things fairly clean and simple. Although, like, labels can get really advanced and really beneficial. I know people like Carl, who was on last week, uses labels. Well, at least the last time I checked, very nicely. So let me just get rid of this one for demonstration purposes. The other way that I've been looking at it recently is looking at setting it up as if you were planning it as a project. So in this case, I need to do some DIY around the house. I don't need to. I need to ask somebody else to do it because I'm useless. So I might be like,
Francesco.
yeah, you can relate. So DIY project. So I may say actually, organize DIY man to come by 31st of July. So using this method, you're not necessarily creating a brand new project, because maybe you didn't want to add another list, or maybe you actually just want to stick with this setup down here. But with the sections bar, you can actually go ahead and start writing out the tasks. You can say like get I think I'm running the beta, so it's a little bit, it's playing around with me sometimes. So I could say buy a wardrobe on IKEA, and you can start listing. So send Adrian the list of ideas for the downstairs cupboard. Sounds very specific because it probably is real. And you can see there that you're actually setting yourself towards a goal there. The downside of, say, using something like this to a project is you're not going to be able to, say, set a specific deadline, or you may be able to, but with specific tasks. But at the same time, it helps to break down a certain activity, and that's something I'm actually looking to do inside of the errands section, is to make this a bit more specific to a goal orientation. So I may be like finance, like be more specific, like save this much, and then I can actually sit down and brainstorm. Okay, what is the next actions I need to do to get this one achieved, and then I can associate dates to them. So it's a very simple activity, and the next so using the sections as projects could be a good way to work. The next thing that I think a lot of people don't know, and something that I didn't know maybe until a year ago, was that if you hover in your inbox, you can actually get a section. And for some people, this can be a nice way to break down how and what new things are coming into their system. So in this case, you may want to begin adding a few sections that are very simple to the day. So you may say admin reads and files. So you may be able to start breaking them down. So whenever tasks come in here, you can drag them to the relevant sections, and that might be a nice sorting ground for your inbox for later, before you say add them to these projects here. Or it could be another capture base for you to say start adding some tasks that you want to complete before you move them to here, or that never actually reach to this location. During my day, I end up capturing stuff in my inbox, about 15 to 20 new items. And sometimes I won't even process them if they don't need doing. If for example, they could be utilized under the GTD method of under 2 minutes, then I will do them all. And having a breakdown using sections for that could be a nice way to do that.
Could
The
you
other
elaborate
way,
on that, Francesco, the GTD 2-minute rule for anybody that may not be?
yeah, sure.
I think that's super, super helpful in the context of using sections.
Yeah, sure. I sometimes forget that not everyone's read it.
Yeah.
But it's essentially what David Allen talks about in the book is about he goes through a process of GTD, but when you're capturing a task and say you're actually got some time and you're looking at it and you don't necessarily want to delegate it or direct it to another location inside of your Todoist account for later, or actually delegate it to someone else, you may actually want to get it done on the spot. So maybe an example, it could be you capture a few things like I'll just add some for this sake, add report, write report, and organize mail redirect. So I've got these three things that are being captured inside of my inbox today, say, and I look at them and I go, actually, emailing Bob is going to take me less than 120 seconds. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to get that switched off the list, because the idea behind it is so that you're sort of getting the ball rolling with things you can do. Otherwise, if it took more than 2 minutes, you could potentially delegate that for later inside of a, say, tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday. And then say I came across an item like write report. Okay, that seems seems very vague, but also it's something that may not take 2 minutes. It may take 15 minutes to write this report. So I may say I'm going to use this feature over here, the due date, and give it into another day. So that could be potentially be your tactic for doing that. And then a third one could be organized mail to redirect. And sometimes this is where you can sort of go with your own ruling around it. Maybe this takes 3 minutes, and you have 3 minutes at the end of your day. You can then process that accordingly, or do it on the spot. So yeah, that's a 2-minute rule, and it's a really really nifty way to just get stuff done if you're procrastinating on it, especially.
I personally incorporated that into my email flow about 2 years ago, and it just changed my whole perspective on email and doing the same thing. If it takes longer than 2 minutes, it gets added as a task to my Todoist and in a section for emails that take longer than 2 minutes, and it works perfectly for me.
Yeah, that's like one of the best examples is email, because like you said, like I do that. If an email is going to take longer than 2 minutes, I'll either tend to snooze it or save it for later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good tactic. And the final sort of core section use that I think like I do this quite regularly, but throughout my day, sometimes I'll look at my to-do list, like let's say tomorrow's to-do list, and to be fair, like I normally try and keep it to like maybe a max of 10 tasks, but in this case it's going to be it looks like it's around about 15. Not good at mental maths, but it can be, when you look at it, it's quite overwhelming as well sometimes. So I think sections inside of the inbox could be used to your advantage, and the way that you could do that is by doing a very simple breakdown. And what I sometimes do, and this is what a lot of people do with pen and paper, or they grab their iPads or they grab their journals and they write out their next tasks, but you could do it inside of Todoist. So you can just make a section called next and make a section called planned, or you could call it deferred. And then you could start going. I'm just going to use the same examples: email Bob, write report, and send mail box. I don't know what that task is. And then you could do the same with planned. Write the next 3 items that are planned after that, or maybe 3 items that you're going to do tomorrow. But the goal behind this is not necessarily to re-replicate everything you're doing, but if you're looking at your task list and you're going, oh my god, I'm getting a bit overwhelmed, and you don't have any filters set up like me. Because you could do this inside of filters, you could narrow it down on what's most important using, I don't know, the Eisenhower method or some GTD method inside of labels. But if you were to open this and actually just create a very simple, right, I can do these next 3 things. And if I do these things, I can become calmer. I can actually get them done and I can move forward instead of actually going, where do I begin? Because naturally you go, right, the red one, I'll do the red one first. But then you may be, I may not be able to get to a phone for, crying baby. I may look to clear the documents, but I can't do that. And then you may be like, okay, what ones am I going to pick from here? One thing you could do as well is you could just simply move them into your inbox and move them into the sections. So that's one of the features I really like inside of Todoist is if you hold Command down on a task, this like mini toolbar pops up at the top, and then you can choose a specific like project. But what's nice is when you click on a project, you get these pop-up options for sections. So in this case, I may want to say, right, I want to do these next, and for this sake, I want to just remove the no due date, but you can keep the due date. And then if I get rid of these, ruining my karma for the day, I could then see my next tasks quite easily. And I can crunch those tasks down without necessarily having to be overwhelmed by my main area. So that's one way you could do it. And it's a nice way to sort of cool down. And it replicates pen and paper to some extent because you're actually just taking yourself out from the environment and actually working on it. And the other way that you can, final point, say you're probably looking at why to do this, and you're like, "What the hell? Clean dishwasher, right?" And you can go on to select project here with the hashtag command, and you can use the find the sections here, which is quite cool. So that's another way to do it if you wanted to go on this sort of very detailed view. But yeah, they're some of the different ways that you could use sections. I think, like for me, I'm starting to learn more and more about them. Oh wait, actually, I don't want to make sure I save these tasks, or else they'll disappear for life. Or actually, they'll just go to the activity log. If I go to move them to errands, home, there we go, nice and neat. So sections I find has so much potential, and especially when you're trying to get some mental clarity using sections in Inbox could be something you can jump into.
Yeah, I noticed, Francesco, like I can tell that you use sections in a pretty deep way because your project list is considering how much you're living in Todoist. You have so few projects relative to maybe what someone else might have with all that work. So like you've kept the project list clean, it seems, and used sections to break out the details.
Yeah, and the thing is that you can like it's up to how the person works, but you can get carried away with projects. Let's be fair. Like I'm even I always look to consider to reduce the amount of projects I've got. Like Rex and Reeds probably could be in the same project. And to some extent, he doesn't need his own bloody project. But they could all be inside of a bit of a neater sort of area. But yeah, like when I used to have in my old account just a project for personal and just a project for work, and I use the sections to like break down the majority of those in the later stages of using it, and it worked wonderfully. Gets a little bit of less clutter down the side, but depends on how you work, of course.
Would you suggest that for somebody? Some people watching here are just getting started with Todoist. Others are very seasoned users looking for new productivity hacks. But for somebody that's just getting started, would you suggest that method, sort of like keep it simple with the project list?
Yeah. Like the biggest recommendation I have, and I always say this with every productivity app, is if you've got a pen and paper to hand, draw a sitemap like you would say designing a little flowchart or a website, or even just what you would like to see. and draw an idea of what projects you think you would most actively use, and ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, do I need all of these projects? Can I whittle them down into smaller areas? For example, if you have a work project with loads of different projects underneath it, sub projects called admin, finance, and all that, could you make some sort of folder or project that you could then use sections inside of to make it neater? And the other thing as well is try and think as long term as possible into how you approach projects. So are you going to be using the same projects in 2 years time, 3 years time? And that's always helpful, especially when you're going through life changes. I remember when I was choosing an application, I decided to go with something like Todoist because it was scalable outside of university, not in the workplace, not just university. And I think when you're picking a tool, that's important, but when you're picking a project, that can also be important, and it will help you. But the third and final thing I'd recommend is having routine analysis of your projects. So every 3 months, set 20 minutes in the calendar, or the Todoist.
You could set a recurring task for that.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, recurring. And set some time to analyze your system and see whether in 3 months you've changed. And it saves you constantly adapting your projects in real time, because sometimes that can be time consuming, a bit messy because you might get it wrong a couple of times. And it also would give you times to improve it. So I used to do like this Todoist series on YouTube called 3-month review or 3-month setup review. And each time people used to say like, oh, you've changed the way you use it. And it's because I set those times out. And I even changed like the emojis, the color icons, and the names to some extent to make it a little bit lighter. I don't know whether you can see on this left-hand side. This is a bit pedantic, but I really like the fact that each title here of the project is smaller at the top and larger at the bottom. It's a weird, aesthetically pleasing thing for me, but you can see like that's the goal behind it. And I changed loads of iterations of calling it personal. I changed from calling it to like life, me. And I think sometimes because you're staring at something like this for so long, it can be a nice way to just fluff up your account.
Yeah, it gives you like a fresh perspective. It's like changing the sheets on the bed or painting a room a new color. It just changes everything and gives you sort of a fresh perspective.
Yeah, and that's a good example, because I don't know about you, but you wouldn't repaint the room every week, would you?
No, probably not.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't paint it every 3 months, but it's a software, not a, but yeah. The reason behind it is, 90 days is normally a cycle where you've made some changes, or you have some opinions on things. So yeah, and that's always really nice. Like, I always am very detailed about the icon use and the way that it feels as well. But yeah, it's and also you probably notice like the most aggressive or the most busiest projects are at the bottom, like 44 and then 4. That's just probably coincidence, but I always, because the bottom one's always fastest to get to. So I'm always clicking on the bottom one, so it has the most the most items in it. A bit detailed for the starter, but
I think that's always interesting though, because you can, I mean, on one hand, actually your account looks a lot less hectic and cleaner actually than a lot of people that use, for the number of tasks that you actually have in there. And that's, as we mentioned earlier, like your project list is a lot shorter, and you use sections to fill out the details. But then what's I think is so interesting is that you can use Todoist in all these different ways to kind of tailor it to your personal interest, the way it looks best for you. And so that's how you've kind of worked it, like you have the 44 tasks and errands, and it happens to be the bottom project. Somebody wanted to flip that reverse. If that worked better for them, they can do that. You can break that errands into multiple different projects and sub-projects or multiple sections. So yeah, I think these are some of the things we want to highlight in these office hours series, is because there are so many different ways it can be super simple or it can be super complex, and you can kind of tailor it to how you like.
Yeah, that's it. Like you hit the nail on the head. Like you can use this. The brilliant thing about sections is it can be as simple as anything, but it also can be taken a little bit deeper. And the thing that I always try and think of sections. Sections really reminds me of threads inside a twist, because like in that extent they're not necessarily channels like projects are, but they're like threads inside of a channel. So that's what I always think of sections as these days.
Yeah, more like individual topic focused things that you can stay focused on it. And I get, actually, that kind of brings me to a question. Like, if someone were to ask you, like, Francesco, when should I switch from doing something as a section, creating a section for something, versus creating a whole new sub project, for instance? Is there like a sort of a rule of thumb you have in mind, or do you just wing it, or what works for you in that context?
Yeah, that's a good question. It could be for some person, like when a section gets out of hand and it becomes really, really messy to manage. And I'm talking maybe 30 plus tasks at a day that you've completed all of the work. Like say you're just scrolling, you're like, actually, it's harder to manage this section, and it probably would be easier to sort of create a brand new project.
Yeah.
Or they've just seen total new relevance for that section to become a project. Like, I don't know, maybe, for example, for many people that have just started working at home, may bring house from inside of errands into its own project because they're spending so much time at home. So that when it could be, shifted. I haven't done that because I still work at home.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed.
Excellent. Well, this has been really helpful already. We've got a couple questions that have already come in. For everybody watching, you can continue to send those questions in. We'll get to them as quickly as we can. The first one that was asked was, can you sort those by due date or by priority? I'm assuming they're referring to the section. Alejandro asked this. Can you sort those by due date or by priority?
I've never actually tried that. Wait, give me a sec. Give me a sec, Alejandro.
And Alejandro, if you could clarify in the chat, just to make sure we understand correctly, you're referring to sorting the sections by due date? Because I imagine he was asking this question in the context of something you were showing earlier.
So let's say I move this one down here and gave this one a plus. This is a good example because I've not done this one. So say if I went to here, so the red's down here, the orange is here. So if I went up to the top and you went to the top project thing, I assume that sorting, but yeah, so you can sort by priority and by due date. So yes, you can do that. And I don't use that much, but occasionally I will inside of errands when I, pull this all down. If I went to up here and I went to sort by date, so I could then see, look, home is much more organized. And that's another thing I didn't mention about the sections area, is that say you had, actually that's a bad example, say you had an project that you say you just wanted to come into, and you want to be able to add some very simple inbox stuff into here, or you just want to add something to one section, you can tuck these down so they, it's like a nice little sort of tweak that you can just have, and it makes things appear a little bit less messy. But yes, Alejandro, you can use the due date and priorities. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see Alejandro's trying to clarify that he's wondering if you can sort by the section itself, which you couldn't really do because like put the section in order of priority or due date, but you couldn't really do that because each section has multiple tasks within it. So
Yeah.
it would be it's sorting based on the task level, not the section level.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But
Good point. I hadn't actually thought about that
Yeah.
before, doing that within the section. And so Robert asks, when dragging tasks to a section, it seems that the section needs to be open rather than collapsed to add to that section. Is that intentional? I'm using the website version while listening.
That's one for you, Chase, isn't it?
Tested on Android, and that dragging does work, so it might be a web interface issue. It needs to be open rather than collapse. You should be able to drag the task to the section, whether it's open or closed.
No, I'm not getting that on my end, but yeah, I think you have to have it open. Yeah, you have to have it open. But that's, I guess, a small tweak, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because
hours of work.
Yeah. Well, that's a great. Thanks for pointing that out, Robert. Because we'll have to check. I know some of our team is watching this, so we can flag that and look into. I believe you're supposed to be able to do that, whether it's opened or not. But also, I can see the benefit of if it's closed. You know that not. If you have it closed, not dragging it and seeing it go through all the tasks, just being able to skip past one section to the next section has its benefits.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chase. I do that inside of errands. I close a lot of them and then keep one of them open just so that it doesn't go in all of them. So yeah, maybe actually that would be a good thing to have. Yeah,
I mean, for me, that's the big benefit of sections. When we launched Todoist Foundations and implemented these what we call real sections, one of the big benefits that I think we gained from that was just the clarity within a project and being able to make it look a lot cleaner, so that you could collapse a lot. You could have 50 or 100 tasks in a project, but collapse a lot of these sections and scoot right past them pretty quickly. And that for me creates a much better experience.
Yeah, definitely.
So Sophia asks, in a recent attempt to diminish my number of projects, I increased the use of sections. I noticed my application got slower from adding more sections. Have you noticed that, Francesco?
No. The only thing I would want to see is when you're clipping stuff on iOS, like for the sections to be available to choose from that like, you know, when you choose a project and you hashtag it, also for the sections to pop up. But in terms of speed, I haven't had that problem. It'd be interesting to see what device Sophia's using.
Yeah, so Sophia, I see she goes on to say that she actually even got a warning saying that beyond 20, there might be 20 sections, there might be performance issues. I have actually never hit that warning, and I do use sections quite a bit. So, Sophia, reach out to us reach out to our support team, and feel free to say that we discussed this in the Doist office hours, and let's look into that a little bit further for you. And then can you move directly from the inbox to a section on iOS? I don't see that. Francesco, are you on iOS?
Yeah, I use so can you move directly from the inbox to a section on iOS? I'm not sure what they mean by that. Do they?
Yeah. Ian, can you elaborate a little bit? Like, so would that be, for instance, let's say you want to add something to your errands project, but you want to move it to a particular section within that project? Great, thanks, Sophia.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that's the question, Francesco. Do you have any tips for organizing within a project? You know, if you want to add, let's say, to your errands project, you want to add something from your inbox directly to an area. What's the quickest way to go about doing that, in your opinion?
I tend to do it on like the majority of my use, unless I say spend 10 minutes on the evening and in Todoist on the desktop version, I'll use the iOS app or the iPad app, and what I like about those apps is that you have the ability to go into the task, and then what I'll tend to do is stay inside of the task view, add all the context points that I can, and then move it to the right section from there. So that's the way that I tend to go about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too. That's the same for me. That's the same for me.
And the dragging abilities now are so much faster than they were before. So like,
Yeah.
say
The new dynamic add button being able to
yeah,
slide up and down. Yeah.
yeah, that's golden.
That was a bit of a game changer for me as well.
Yeah.
We had some. We also had some questions come in beforehand. So someone had asked.
Yeah.
So, how do you suggest? We actually already answered that. So it was about when to use a project or a sub project or a section, and we've sort of already touched on that. So how do you differentiate between sub projects and new sections? Sometimes I want to create a new section, but I'm unsure if it should be a sub project. It seems like we've sort of answered that, but did you have anything else you wanted to elaborate on for your workflow in regards to that?
Yeah, I think I use projects a little bit different to say I think the average person, because a lot of people just create a project based on a goal, but I use the projects areas more of like an areas, in the context of like how Tiago Forte sort of breaks it down. Like I'll tend to use say is because it's like personal, and then it's like smaller things inside of it. None of it is date based, none of it is action led. It's really just projects or lists to some extent. So yeah, it depends. If you're someone that like works routinely, then you may want like a areas project with some subfolders, and then you may want a uh, folder for active projects, and then have all of your active projects below. And then when you complete them all, you can just close them down as and when. But yeah, that's probably something that you'll have to ask yourself depending on
Yeah.
how often you use it. Yeah.
You're not it seems like you're not necessarily trying to get rid of projects in a sense of like you see a project as like your errands project is not going to go away. That's
Yeah.
not something that you're
I
working to
hope it
get to
does.
the end of.
Yeah. There's
These are
no end to it.
perpetual.
Yeah.
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 All right.
Ian put on the side, I think he clarified it a little bit more, but
Yeah. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any way, and it's a good idea if it is available, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that there's a way to add to like with the hashtag command to add something to a project. I don't believe there's a command to add something to a particular section.
I'd love that.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a word.
For any of our product team watching, this is a good idea.
Yeah. It might get a bit messy, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of getting off the subject of sections, but just while we've got you and sort of along the same lines, actually, a good segue is, so what keyboard shortcuts do you tend to use most often, or which ones do you think are the most powerful? So like we just mentioned, like for those of you watching that may not be aware, like you can use hashtag to identify a project, to add it to the project rather than selecting the project from the drop-down menu. But are there any others that you use a lot, Francesco, that you'd recommend people kind of get started with right away?
Like you said, I use intelligent input the majority of the time. Like, I'd hate to see anyone look over my shoulder, like on a bus or something, and see like me typing in Tom hashtag and then P3. They'd be like, "What the heck is he doing? What a weirdo!" But that's like the intelligent input is like where I do the majority of the quick fast shortcuts. But in terms of keyboard shortcuts, I don't really use many. The one that I have been using the most recently on the desktop version, I think this is only for larger screens, but I'm not sure, is the M, where you can just minimize the sidebar that you have on the left, and
Mm-hmm.
you can just tuck it away. And what I like that for particularly is because if you're like getting a bit overwhelmed by what you're seeing on the left and you just want to narrow in, especially just quickly, then you can just press M and then you've got whatever you have in front of you nicely there. Yeah.
Perfect. Use the M, everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, not really on the subject of sections, but again, while we've got you here, how about integrations? Do you use any integrations with Todoist to kind of increase productivity and take your workflow to another level? I know you're a big Notion fan as well, and you use those two together. But in terms of like actual integrations, do any of those kind of power up your workflow?
I've been tempted in the past, but I'm just going to have a double check whether I actually use them. I have been tempted in the past by some of the like toggle integrations and Pomodoro timer integrations, and I think I used for a while the Timely one. But the most often apps that I use these days are I can't get enough of using Google Home Todoist when I'm like need to write stuff down before bed, because I don't necessarily want to get my phone out, but I could just say, "Okay, Google, sorry if I'm setting off everyone's device at home. Let me speak to Todoist," and then when I actually can, I can add a task and maybe even move stuff there. Um, and the second one that I use is inside of my email app, Missive. I'm sort of blending between another one at the moment. Missive, I use there's a sidebar integration that allows you to add in tasks from your email and associate them to an email. So that's also a really good one. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. And one thing I love to ask our ambassadors, like the people that are, you're working with other people who are trying to learn Todoist or are trying to integrate it into their workflows, and you're teaching people, different ways to use it to their advantage. When you come across teams or people who are trying to begin collaboration, they want to use Todoist to collaborate with other coworkers or family members or whatever. Do you have any general tips? I think what some people run into is like you use Todoist a certain way and somebody else uses Todoist another way, and now you're trying to collaborate together and use it in a similar way. So do you have any tips for people beginning sort of the collaboration process using Todoist?
Yeah, I think the sharing is one of the best inside of the Todoist projects because you can share it with someone and you can both see it in real time. And if you've got premium, you can chat in the comments as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I like, the thing I used to do with projects a lot is whenever I I sent an invite out to a project, like everyone uses it differently, but at the same time, I didn't want people to like a delegate task or over fill my own area. So what I did is I created a section at the start of the project, and I called it House Rules, and I put a nice little house emoji, and below there I put no due date tasks that people had to tick off. Like for example, rule one, um, it could be like don't delegate something unless it clearly has to be done, or I can't remember what the rules were, but they were different for each project. But you set these say 3 or 4 rules for the person to tick off and almost like approve before they go in, and then below having sections for each of the different pieces of work you're working on. So you're almost setting a precedent for each project. It's almost like reading like a wiki before you go into a project. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the best tips I'd have, especially when you've got people that get too excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's great. That's very helpful. I think it's funny because obviously at Doist, we use Todoist to manage all of our projects as a team, and we're all sort of like power users of the product. It's what we live in and build every day. So it's easy to kind of unable to see the forest from the trees a little bit sometimes. Like, how does somebody collaborating for the very first time in Todoist see this? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it complex? Is it powerful? And so it's always interesting, I think, to talk to people who are getting to experience that, fairly often.
Yeah.
Perfect. That is all the questions that I have. If anybody's got any other ones, feel free to drop them in here real quick. But otherwise, we'll wrap things up here and look forward to having another discussion with Francesco in a few weeks. Francesco, do you want to finish off with any last tips or anything? And then, of course, also, I think it'd be great if you could sort of share a little bit about what your platform is all about and how people can find you and the best places to see your work.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Chase. And they were cracking questions, both from you and the community. So, and if anybody has any questions after, they can email me, Francesco@keepproductive.com, because I'm happy to help anyone go through that start of the journey with a Todoist app. So, but yeah, the tip that I'd have is just is actually that 3-month tip is just always look to improve your system, but in a planned and fixed environment versus too routinely, because it can get overwhelming if you always change your environment. But yeah, so if you fancy following Keep Productive afterwards, we have a YouTube channel which helps people to find the most suitable tool for them. So we help review not just Todoist, but plenty of other applications in the productivity space. And then what we do is we do deep dives, so we can help somebody go a bit further. But we've got a fantastic, I think you mentioned it anyway, the fantastic Todoist Made Simple group where people are chattering, over 3,000 people, I think, all starting conversations about Todoist. So, feel free to join us there, of course.
Yeah, it's a wealth of knowledge and information there, and on all your platforms. But I think that's one of the really unique ones where you've got a constant flow of chatter going about how to implement Todoist in your life and in the best possible way. So yeah, that's fantastic. We'll have you on again in a couple weeks, and so everybody be on the lookout for more details about that. We're still nailing down the topic, but we'll have Francesco back, and Carl from our last Todoist office hours will be back in 2 weeks as well. So we've got a great lineup of our Todoist ambassadors coming up, showing you their favorite tips and tricks. So stay tuned, and yeah, go give Francesco a follow and support his platform over there. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming, Francesco. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon too, Chase. Lovely meeting you as well.
Yeah, agreed, finally. Right. Thank you guys for coming, and yeah, we'll see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, cheerio.